college football multiverse is a very, very strange place. You had an article come out actually this morning from ESPN's Chris Lowe talking about Alabama and the hiring of Kalen DeBoer, and it's an awesome article, really great insight into the way that Alabama approached that whole hiring process. But there's a paragraph in there that raised a lot of eyebrows from Oxford, Mississippi and Tallahassee, Florida. We'll give you our thoughts on that here in a moment, but welcome into the Hard Count. It is Wednesday. Biggest Wednesday of the week, some are saying. March 6, 2024, last one on the face of the planet. It is a beautiful, absolutely glorious Shane Beamer Wednesday. I got him on the show here in a matter of moments, talking everything from the trenches to the way that he's approaching that quarterback derby of sorts. Who's going to take that first snap? You may have already gotten that intel if you are tuned in over at Gamecock Central, South Carolina's On 3 site. But he talks us through the process in hiring the staff. Really, really great in-depth conversation with Coach Beamer. Excited for y'all to hear that one. Also, spring what-ifs. They're back. Spring football is about to get on and popping. It's already on and popping across certain spots in the country, but we give you our biggest what-ifs for places like Columbus, Ohio. We got some spring what-ifs for the good folks in College Station. What would be big for them this spring? We got some thoughts there. Also, Madison, Wisconsin. We got a special place in our heart for Luke Fickell and the Badgers. Got a big what-if for them there. Who are some non-transfer portal quarterbacks that you need to know? Because the quarterbacks, man, we love them. We talk a lot about them on this show. We'll talk about them, it feels like, pretty much every single episode that we do here. During transfer portal season, I mean, that's all we're talking. But who are some of those names that maybe you know about or didn't know about and where they ended up at that are going to impact their respective conference title races as well as the college football playoff? Got right about 5 names for you to know. Non-quarterbacks to know, both offensive and defensive players included there. Excited for y'all to hear that. Also, Steve Spurrier. Yes, Florida Gators legend Steve Spurrier had some things to say about Billy Napier and his thoughts on the way that football program is being run right now. Now, Jesse Simonton, columnist for us here at On 3, has a phenomenal article on that already, so go check it out. We'll give you our 2 cents on that, though, here in just a matter of moments. Hey, we're glad to have y'all here. You have a ton going on. We say this every single show, but there's a lot going on in your world. A lot of it that is, quite frankly, no fun to deal with. So when you tune into this show, we'll check those at the door. A little mental vacation of sorts. We'll have some fun. We'll talk some college football. Want to hear from y'all in the chat, so get in there right now. We'll get some of your thoughts and questions here at the end of the show. Let's get right to it, baby. Can't waste too much more time. The college football multiverse kind of peeked its head at us this morning with Chris Lowe dropping an article on ESPN talking about how Alabama moved from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer in a matter of 49 hours. Now, credit Greg Byrne because he gave a 72-hour window. He said, I knew I was going to get it in less than 72 hours, but I wanted to give myself some padding to make that next hire. And this article is really mostly a Bama-centric article. So if you're an Alabama fan, go check that out. And the way that it is told, he says, listen, it was down to Kalen DeBoer. It was down to Mike Norvell. Those were the 2 top targets. Now, there's a little paragraph there, though. There's a little paragraph in this story that raises some eyebrows as it pertains to Mike Norvell and Lane Kiffin. The article reads, in fact, in the wee hours of that Friday morning, the fear among Florida State officials was that Mike Norvell was close to trading his Florida State Garnet for Alabama Crimson. Sources told ESPN that Florida State was poised to move quickly if that happened, and that Lane Kiffin was a prime candidate. Lot to unpack there. A lot to get to there. So we'll talk about that in a second. Alabama was obviously swinging for the fence here down to Kalen DeBoer and Mike Norvell. That's pretty obvious. And we knew they were going to be, as long as you have that script A and you have that crimson colorway, like you were going to be able to go out and hire a pretty attractive big-time name. The article does a really good job talking through the thought process for Greg Byrne. He's like, listen, most of the time you're either hiring a G5 head coach, a Power 5 coordinator, or an NFL coordinator. He's like, quite frankly, for us here at Alabama, that same logic didn't really apply. By nature of them being down to these 2 candidates, pretty much speaks for itself. But if you're a Florida State fan, man, how good do you have to feel about yourself? How good do you have to feel about yourself? The obvious part is, okay, you kept your guy home, right? You kept Mike Norvell and the success that he's already had in Tallahassee, staying in Tallahassee to keep on building with that. And Mike Norvell, on this very show, we asked him about it. Hey, your name came up in this search. And this was, of course, before we knew that it came down to him being one of the top 2 candidates for this search. Said, why did you, reaffirm your commitment to Florida State? And he said, the people make the place. That was one of the big things that he said in answering that question. But he said something at the end of that interview saying, I believe in where we're headed. I believe where we're going. And it's one thing for a coach to say publicly at a press conference or in the locker room to his team, and that gets captured on video, hey, I believe where we're going. We've got to keep hammering away. We got to trust the mission here. It's one thing to say all that, but then to actually double down on it and to say no to one of the most attractive jobs at that point in time, the most attractive job in not just college football, in sports, and to be able to stay in Tallahassee and to get some more money to do so and enhancing his contract, that says a lot about how Mike Norvell feels about Florida State. It's not just lip service. It's truly doubling down and saying, I believe we can win here. We have everything we need to win here. We've already built a fair amount of the foundation to accomplish what we want to accomplish. That whole 12-team playoff stuff, that's going to help Florida State going forward. I know the 4-team playoff scenario fiasco, if you're a Florida State fan, it hurt this season. It didn't feel good. That's not going to happen ever again. It's not going to happen ever again. I promise you that. So that's the obvious part. However, you look at what they were going to do if Mike Norvell left for Alabama. Now, thank goodness, if you're a Florida State fan, you don't have to ever walk through that scenario in reality. But in principle, I think you can learn a lot about an organization by their plan in case of an emergency. Like your preparedness to respond to adverse situations. And make no mistake about it, Mike Norvell leaving Florida State for Alabama would have been a very adverse situation. But they had a plan in place. And the plan they had in place to go after Lane Kiffin, now whether it would have landed him or not is a whole other discussion, but the fact they were going to go and attack and try and grab somebody who was on the cutting edge of modern college football tells me a lot about the direction of Florida State and just the way that they're trending and where they're heading right now, which is encouraging to me. Like you see Mike Norvell, let's say he leaves for Alabama, you say, okay, we have a portal king leave for Alabama. We go and set our sights on another portal king. Why? Because that's the way that modern college football is headed. It's no longer a situation where you can just live off of high school recruiting. You have to improve your roster and push the envelope every single year. And by nature of them setting their sights on Lane Kiffin tells me that's a priority to them. That tells me they understand that. They understand that you have to play this kind of game now to be successful in college football. Now, as the dust settles, I'm not just saying this to say this. I truly think this probably worked out for everybody. You say, well, yeah, of course, Mike Norvell and Florida State, they feel good about keeping Mike Norvell. But for Mike Norvell, I think to be able to see through the upward trend that he has put into place in Tallahassee, I think that means something. And not to say that Alabama wouldn't have been a great job and he couldn't have been successful there, but I think he's already done a lot of the legwork and laid a pretty solid foundation at Florida State to really accomplish what they want to accomplish now. Like they've kind of pushed this thing up the hill to a degree, and now they get to really start reaping the rewards. Now, this year will sort of be a telling factor into their process with having to replace so much production. But from a cultural standpoint, I think he's done a lot of the legwork. Now, for Lane Kiffin, though, this is where it kind of gets interesting because folks will see this headline and say, well, isn't Florida State a bigger brand? And in some ways, you might argue, is it a better job than Ole Miss? I don't know. I think that probably depends on who you ask. Probably depends on how close you are to Oxford, Mississippi, and how close you are to Tallahassee, Florida. But I think a lot of the fit for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is how much Ole Miss embraces Lane Kiffin. And I'm not just saying from like we love to cheer for him when he walks out there on Saturday afternoons. We love to, cheer him on when we go for it on 4th and 3 or however many 4th downs they go for this year for Ole Miss. The thing with Ole Miss is they embrace everything that comes with Lane Kiffin. Because Lane Kiffin now, this is one of the reasons why we thought he was not a fit for the Auburn job. He beats to his own drum. He operates with the media a certain way. He operates on Twitter a certain way. He recruits and goes at the portal a certain way. And it's one thing to allow that. It's another thing to totally embrace that. Like I promise you can't go to the portal the way that Ole Miss has gone to the portal if you don't have NIL resources to bring in some of that top talent. Just the fact of the matter. And so as much as Lane Kiffin is quirky, Ole Miss, they're all in on that. They're embracing that and they're championing that. They're allowing him to be the best version of Lane Kiffin. I'm not saying Florida State wouldn't have done that, but if you're Lane Kiffin, why risk it? You have an SEC job. The playoff is expanding. I think you're about to have the best roster you've had in Oxford, Mississippi in a long, long time. So all things considered, I think this worked out best for everybody. I do think Alabama actually got their guy. Now, was he the top guy on the list to begin with? I don't think it matters at this point. You got one of the winningest head coaches in the sport. And may the best coach win when it comes to this 12-team playoff format. So this search, though, definitely altered college football to begin with. But can you imagine if the domino fell where Mike Norvell leaves for Alabama and then Lane Kiffin goes to Florida State? I mean, wild times in the college football multiverse. That's why we love it. That's why we love this game, man. Appreciate everybody dialed in live again. Make sure you've liked the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. All that good stuff, man. We had a really great conversation with South Carolina head ball coach Shane Beamer. As I mentioned, we talked Lenora Sellers and the rec specs. We talked the hiring of his staff. We talked off-season conditioning and Shane Beamer getting after it in a military obstacle course. Without further ado, here's Shane Beamer. And we now have the pleasure of being joined by South Carolina head ball coach Shane Beamer. And, Coach, I got to start here. There's a short social media clip put out by your team about the military workouts that y'all recently just did. At the end of that video, it shows you calling out the whole staff and say, hey, I need 7 staff members to go through this military obstacle course with me. I need the backstory, and then also how did y'all do in the old overall obstacle course there?
So backstory was we went out to the local military base here in Columbia, Fort Jackson. So thankful for those guys and so thankful for all they do for our country and the freedoms they provide us as well. And it was a great team building, team bonding morning over at Fort Jackson. So our players went through it was a 16 station obstacle course where they're in the mud, they're dirty, and I mean it's taxing. And I try and stay active. I like to work out. I think I'm still young. And I was watching it thinking, going back and forth the whole time, thinking, do I want to do this myself? Looks fun, but then again, like they're getting completely soaked in mud and dirt and whatnot. And the answer ended up being yes. And then what we initially had decided was we were going to take we had 10 teams. And the top 4 teams were going to compete and have to go through it one more time to determine who the champion was. And there was a little bit of resistance and pushback from our players to have to go through it again. Like they were trying to figure out what the reward was going to be to have to do this obstacle course again as a reward. So I was just kind of sitting there looking at them and like, you know what, I don't want to make these guys have to do this again. And it might be a pretty cool thing if me as the head coach and then some staff members said, you know what, we're in this battle with you guys and we're going to do it as well. So I sit it, and it seemed like a better idea when I sit it as opposed to when I was actually doing it. Recruited some other staff members, got super muddy, super dirty. Time-wise, we weren't last, but we weren't first either. But we weren't far off. But as you know, if you're not first, you're last. And so we weren't overall. We didn't win it, but I thought we had a respectable showing. And then we had the entire team basically running with us through this obstacle course, cheering us on and supporting it. So in all seriousness, it was a really cool moment for the team and team bonding. And they got to see, you know what, the coaches are going to get right in the middle of this thing with you guys, not just at Fort Jackson, but all year long.
I know that had to make a lot of those other buses on the ride home, a lot of the players that didn't go through it another time, that probably helped the overall vibes for the rest of that day, knowing that their coaches went through it with them. Coach, winter conditioning, though, we've talked about it before on this show. Like it's taxing. It is obviously like the least glamorous time of the college football calendar year if you're a player. What's been the messaging for you during this winter conditioning during this winter conditioning period to your team?
Yeah, I think the thing for us is looking back at last season, record-wise, we didn't finish where we wanted, but we weren't far off either. You know, we had an opportunity to win every game going into the fourth quarter, and we just, in a lot of those games, we just couldn't get it done. We couldn't finish and couldn't get over the hump. So taking a step back and just looking at everything that we're doing and how can we be better and just challenging every single person in our program to be even more personally accountable. That, you know, it starts with each individual and being better than we were last season, including me as the head coach, and to be the reason that we have the success that we want to have this season. And really proud of our guys, the way that we've worked. We're going into, as we record this, we're going into spring break next week, and then get ready to crank up a spring practice when we come back. But really like what our guys have done since we came back in January, and we've been going at it since the Monday of the national championship game is when we started winter workouts, and really like this group coming back and their maturity and how they're going about their business.
And Coach, a lot of new faces on the staff as well, from Sean Elliott being the run game coordinator and tight ends coach. Y'all just hired Mike Furry all of like around 24 hours ago, the time I was recording this. What was the philosophy for you with making these new hires to your staff?
Just how we can be better. You know this from being around the profession. I mean, every time you have an opening, it's always a different fit, maybe what you're looking for each and every time. And what I was looking for at one position last year or 2 years ago maybe isn't what I was looking for this year. And just trying to find guys at the end of the day that can make us better on and off the field. And areas where maybe we weren't good enough at last year, bringing in guys that can help more and whatnot, and feel like we have. I like the group that we have right now. It's a group of guys that want to be here, that was telling my wife, just the staff dynamic, the staff chemistry. We have been together a short period of time, but I can already tell there's a difference, and not that it was bad last year, but just a difference and a more of a connection than what we had. And excited about the hires. They're excited about being here and eager to get to work with them.
And new faces on the roster too, Coach. I mean, y'all attacked it in the portal, a top 5 portal class, brought in almost 20 guys. Was there a certain filter for you with deciding, okay, who are the right guys to bring in, not just for the roster, but also for this like insanely exciting and awesome, attractive culture we have in Columbia?
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's a lot of talented guys that were in the portal that we looked at and evaluated, but they've got to be a fit for what we're about, and they got to be about the right stuff to fit what we're doing here as a program, culture-wise. And there were some guys that we brought in on visits that at the end, I didn't feel like they were a fit for what we wanted and needed. But we've really increased the leadership and culture in that locker room. And again, I don't think it was bad last year, but the guys that we've brought in, we haven't had a snap of a spring practice, but already they've made us better, whether it be the physical attributes like their athleticism, or whether it be just their leadership and the kind of people they are. You know, we brought in a transfer last year that was on the 2023 team, Nick Gargiulo from Yale. He's at the NFL Combine right now, and I think he's at the Combine. But he was our center for us last year, and was voted a team captain. He spent less than a year here, but was voted a permanent captain by his teammates. And I think we've got a few guys like that we've brought in that will certainly be leaders on this year's team and have shown that already.
You mentioned leadership. Obviously, the quarterback position is going to be a huge part of that for your team. Coach, I love any athlete that wears rec specs. Lenora Seller, you said he's getting the first rep for spring ball, and then they'll battle it out from there. What does he bring to the offense, and how does he change the way that maybe you can call things with a quarterback of his size?
Yeah, he's a great young man, first and foremost. Really used that year last year to get better. When we put him in games last season, he performed well, whether it be at the end of the game after wins over Vanderbilt and Furman, or we used him in a kind of a package against Kentucky as well. And he was always productive in those moments. Moments not too big for him. So I think he's got a great way about himself. And then just physically, he's a big kid and can run. He's still young, don't get me wrong, but he's a winner. Won a state championship in high school at South Florence High School here in South Carolina, and is made of the right stuff. So he's young. We got to continue to be good around him. We got a competition in that room, along with Robbie Ashford, who we brought in from Auburn, and Davis Bevel, who transferred in from Oklahoma, and Dante Reno, a freshman that just got here, and then Luke Doty, who's been in our program now since before I became the head coach. So I like that room. They're doing a good job of supporting one another, and excited to watch that quarterback position compete with one another when we start spring practice.
The coach, 6'3", 240. I don't want to tackle Lenora Sellers. I don't envy anybody else who has to. I don't think that'll be something y'all do during spring ball, right? We're throwing the green jersey on him. He's non-contact, we think.
I would think. Now, we've done this every year that I've been here, and we did it last spring. We did it last August with some of those young quarterbacks that haven't been hit. We want to, I don't want to say let them get hit, but we need to throw them in the fire. So we had some scrimmages. I remember a scrimmage that we had last spring when Lenoris got here, that he was live, and we did allow him to get tackled. And it was a day that not many of our defensive guys could tackle him. So he likes that. Like, he gets mad if you don't make him live. So we'll be smart with him and all of our quarterbacks. But, you always worry about your quarterbacks getting hit. But then you also, the other end of the spectrum is you blow the whistle too quick. And then all the quarterbacks, if they're competitors, they come to you and they're like, there's no way that guy would have tackled me on that play. So it's kind of like you got to balance both of them.
Yeah, I mean, those are just the unknown is the undefeated, right? In those situations, either the quarterback's making a miss or they're making a tackle or whatever it ends up being. Coach, going back to that quarterback room, you mentioned all the names in there. What's it going to take to win the job at South Carolina?
Yeah, great question. I think just the leadership and the intangibles you want at the position, and somebody that can lead our football team. And then for me, it's really just being able to, protect the football and make good decisions. And we've been a defense here at South Carolina defensively all 3 seasons that I've been here as the head coach. We've either been first or second in the SEC in takeaways defensively. So we need to continue to do a great job of creating turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, but we need to do an even better job offensively of protecting the ball. And we didn't do a great job of that in 2021 or 22. We were better in 2023, but still not good enough. So just a guy that'll make great decisions and lead our offense and give us a chance to win football games.
And obviously, whoever is catching the ball from them is going to be a massive part of the offense as well. Xavier Legette, I think, surprised a lot of people nationally with what he did last season. I mean, over 1,200 yards receiving. Is there someone in that wide receiver room that you think could maybe make a similar impact with Legette gone to the league?
Yeah, I'm excited about every position when we get out on the field for spring practice, but probably none more so than the wide receiver position, just because there's so many unknowns there. And I'm eager to see kind of who does separate themselves, because I believe we got a lot of talented guys in there, but they're young. Whether we brought in Jared Brown, a transfer from Coastal Carolina, Amari Huggins-Bruce, a transfer from Louisville, and Gage Larbadane, a transfer from Miami of Ohio. So there's 3 transfers that we've brought in. I really like the freshman class that we brought in, 2 freshman receivers. The freshman that we had on last year's team, I'm excited about, but there's a lot of unproven guys in there. And it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out in spring practice. It's a talented group. They're fast, they're athletic. We have a lot of potential in that room, and really confident in the group, but fired up to see who does separate themselves and shows that they can be a guy that we can count on this year.
Awesome. Well, Coach, last question for you. We obviously appreciate all your time. The trenches seem to be a point of emphasis for y'all through the portal, adding guys on the defensive and offensive side of the ball there on the line of scrimmage. Is there a thought process for you when it comes to spring ball, how you pull the very most you can out of those position groups?
Yeah, I think from an offensive standpoint, it's just position flexibility. And we had 6 season-ending injuries last year on the offensive line. And you better have position flexibility if that were to happen. And we did, meaning tackles that can play guard, guards that can play center, centers that can play tackle, which we had last season. We moved our starting center, Vershawn Lee, to right tackle about 2/3 of the way through the season. So you don't want to have to do that, but it helps when you can. So being able to just kind of develop a solid rotation of guys that have some position flexibility. And then defensively, same thing. We brought in some transfers at defensive end and defensive tackle, getting those guys up to speed, rotating a lot of guys in there. We were very thin at defensive tackle last year. Our rotation was really just about 3-4 guys total, and we need to develop more depth at the defensive line position. So that'll be a point of emphasis in spring practice. And then frankly, this, you look year after year in college football, the best teams in the country at stopping the run, they're probably competing for a championship. And, I think Michigan was at the top or one of the best teams, if not the best team in the country last year in run defense, and they won the national championship. Georgia's always up there near the top. So we got to be better at running the ball, and we got to be better at stopping the run, both, for us to get where we want to go as a program.
Well, Coach, we appreciate all your time. We're really grateful you took a few minutes with us with country music. It sounds like a concert on the horizon. We're doing the military obstacle course. Thanks for making some time to talk some ball, and we can't wait to watch y'all get after it in the spring and in the fall.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me on, and keep up the great work. Appreciate all you do for college football.
Coach Shane Beamer giving us a little bit of his time. Spring football, man, about to get rolling here all across the country. South Carolina is one of those teams, too, that it's funny the difference a year makes when it comes to public perception. Like last year, South Carolina coming off those 2 top 10 wins to finish the season, and Spencer Rattler and the way he caught fire, and everybody's buying stock in South Carolina. And a couple of things don't break South Carolina's way this past season, and everyone's like, is he on the hot seat? You know how we feel about South Carolina and how we feel about Shane Beamer. I still think those previous 2 seasons where they overachieved should hold a little bit more weight than the 1 year where they've underachieved. I believe in Shane Beamer. The SEC is getting absolutely brutal, but I love the way that he has attacked the portal and just the way that he has operated throughout the entirety of his time at South Carolina. So we root for him openly on this show. I mean, we're not a journalistic kind of operation here. We have favorites. We have teams we like to see do well, coaches we like to see do well, and Shane Beamer is absolutely one of those coaches. So with that being said, with spring football getting rolling, got some what-ifs. Some what-ifs all across college football. Let's start out here when it comes to Ohio State and Jeremiah Smith. What if Jeremiah Smith is wide receiver 1 for Ohio State? Now, I know what you're saying. Hey, JD, Emeka Egbuka, he's back in Columbus. He's still on that roster. 100% true. And with me saying this what-if around Jeremiah Smith, with him only having, I believe, like 1 or 2 practices under his belt at this point, that's not me saying that Emeka Egbuka somehow falls off the face of the earth and has a lesser season. I'm not saying that. My what-if here is what if Jeremiah Smith is all that he's billed to be as a high school recruit as soon as he steps foot on campus in Columbus, Ohio, as soon as he hits the grass for game 1 for Ohio State. How much would that change about this offense? Because Jeremiah Smith, for those of y'all unfamiliar, the number 1 player in the country, not number 1 wide receiver, number 1 player in the country for the class of 2024. Freakish athleticism. I mean, he's about Marvin Harrison Jr.'s size right now as a true freshman. And that's not saying Marvin Harrison Jr. as a true freshman was the same size as Jeremiah Smith. That's Marvin Harrison Jr. last year is the same size as Jeremiah Smith, right in that 6'3", 215 range. That's wild. So if that's the case, it means a couple of things. It means Will Howard has options offensively. It means you can stretch a defense by getting the ball to Emeka Egbuka. You can get the ball to Jeremiah Smith. Those are both 2 real options for you. And then on top of that, if you're the safeties, if you're the linebackers, you gotta give a second thought to the pass game when you're playing Ohio State. And when you can't trigger quickly on the run game as quickly as you would like to because you're worried about Jeremiah Smith catching a slant behind your ear and going all the way to the house, that means you can't trigger as quickly on Quinshon Judkins when he gets inside zone or Traven Henderson when he gets around the corner. You don't want to play a half step slow in college football, period, but especially against this Ohio State offense. So likely that means that Ohio State offensively is back to scoring right around 40 points a game, and it means they're probably in that rarefied air we've expected them to be in the Big Ten Conference, and they're probably right up there for the Big Ten title. So staying in the Big Ten, here's a big what-if for us. What if Dylan Raiola wins the quarterback 1 job this spring at Nebraska? We're not talking about him eventually winning right before game 1. I'm talking if he wins it during these 15 practices. He's an early enrollee. He's one of the most high-profile prospects at the quarterback position that they've had. Matt Rule on this very show yesterday, he told us, when we know at quarterback, we know. Like, I don't want to play games with people. I don't want to waste anybody's time. When we have our quarterback, we'll announce the starter. If that's Dylan Raiola in the spring, that would be massive for Nebraska for a couple of reasons. And the first part of this being you can start to tailor the offense then to Dylan Raiola. Because there's a lot made about offensive scheme and personnel, and whoever you have at quarterback, when you know who that is, you can start to build to their strengths, build to the kind of things they like to do on the football field. And that's a very big difference, tailoring your scheme to the person touching the football every single snap, as opposed to trying to do the whole one-size-fits-all method for your quarterback. It's empowering, too, from a locker room standpoint to know who your quarterback is. Dylan Raiola, he's a young cat. So when you give him that QB1 label, it's going to give him a little bit more credibility to say things in that locker room. It gives the older players in that locker room, the leadership guys already, to kind of come around him and support him and champion him. It's just good overall to know who your quarterback is sooner rather than later so you can have a clear direction for everybody involved. For Florida State, they're no stranger to going after the portal. We talked about Mike Norvell and his habits when it comes to the portal throughout the course of his time in Tallahassee. This year will be no different. Malik Benson is coming over from Alabama, and Malik Benson this time a year ago was getting very major buzz, or I guess it was going into the 2023 season, so right around fall camp. There was buzz for him being wide receiver 1 in Alabama. Now, obviously, that didn't end up being the case. He ends up transferring to Florida State. What if Malik Benson this spring generates the kind of buzz that Keon Coleman had in fall camp last year? Now, Keon Coleman transferring from Michigan State a season ago, we all saw what Keon Coleman did on the football field this past fall, pretty much whatever he wanted to. But he was a rather unknown commodity of sorts before he got to Tallahassee. Like, Keon Coleman did some really good things for Michigan State. He was going to be Michigan State's best wide receiver. There was no mistaking that. But when Keon Coleman got there in fall camp, you talk to people at War Chant, the Florida State On 3 site, go check that out, get a membership there. You would read the message boards, you talk to the insiders, and everyone said the same thing. If we didn't know he was a transfer, we wouldn't know he was a transfer. By the nature of the plays that he made consistently, by how seamlessly he integrated into that offense, there would be no way to tell that. And so the thing to watch here for the spring, the big what if, like I just mentioned, what if we start to hear that same kind of buzz around Malik Benson? Malik Benson was one of the top junior college wide receivers. I think he was the top junior college wide receiver when he came out. This is a dude now. Very real speed. He's got like a 6'5" wingspan, even though he's only about 5'11", 6 foot. He can go for you. So if he translates the way that Keon Coleman translated, I'm not saying he's the same kind of player, but if he ends up being that wide receiver 1 real deep threat for you, real alpha dog for you, and that way, obviously a huge benefit of that would be to DJ Uiagalelei. And honestly, I think this gives us a more true assessment of DJ Uiagalelei if he has the weapons he needs on the perimeter. Because that was kind of the knock, I think, at Clemson was, oh, well, he's not this, he's not that. I don't know that we ever really got a great gauge because there wasn't really a ton of game breakers out wide for him. Just wasn't. I mean, it's not to say anything negative about Clemson. It's just at quarterback, you're obviously a little bit limited as to who you have catching the football for you. That's kind of a governor for you. Now, a good quarterback will elevate you, but I think Malik Benson, if he can be a true wide receiver dog for them, a true wide receiver 1 kind of dog for them, that's going to keep Florida State's offense multiple, and that would obviously change the ceiling of what Florida State can do in 2024. Speaking of the Sunshine State, let's talk about a player who transferred out of the Sunshine State and is going to some colder weather. That's Tyler Van Dyke. My what if for TVD is, what if he is back to his old tricks? What if he is what Tanner Mordecai was supposed to be in 2023 for Wisconsin? Because that was kind of the thing for us on this very show. We were telling you, like, hey, they're changing the offense. Phil Longo going a little bit more of a modern style of offense because they're going to push the ball downfield. And Tanner Mordecai, he wasn't bad. He was dinged up, and he wasn't as effective as you would have hoped he would be. But Tyler Van Dyke, man, we've seen him thrive in this style of offense. Say what you want about the last couple of seasons. When he was playing in an air raid offense under Rhett Lashley, we were talking about him being one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football, not just the ACC. Now, obviously, that was based on the trend that he would continue to progress and continue to get better, which didn't happen. But in 2021, he threw for almost 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. With the defense they have coming back, 71% of that production, that allowed 20 points a game last year. And that running back room still being stocked, how you would expect a Wisconsin running back room to look, they're going to have a chance now. That's going to give Wisconsin a chance to really compete for a Big Ten title in the Hunger Games kind of style that conference will be. And make no mistake, for Wisconsin to do that, they're going to have to score points. Like I talked with Andy Staples about this on his show this morning. The Big Ten is shifting to where you can't just be a one-trick pony. You can't be hard hat, lunch pail, 3 yards in the cloud of dust. You might be able to do that and go, 8-4, 9-3 on a good year, but to win the Big Ten, to win double-digit games, you got to be able to score with the Oregons, to score with the Ohio States, to score with the USCs. Say what you want about their defense. USC knows offense. Lincoln Riley knows offense. So if Tyler Van Dyke has the buzz out of spring football of, hey, he looks like he's just a new person. Hey, he looks so comfortable. He looks like he's in complete control and command. And those will be things that we're just taking a temperature of, but would tell us a lot about the direction of Wisconsin. That would be massive. That would be massive for Wisconsin, be massive for the Big Ten and that whole conference title race. Last what if to get to here, we'll go out to College Station, Texas. This is just very, very broad, but I think we're going to learn a lot about it this spring. What if Texas A&M gets the structure right? And when I say structure, I mean culture, I mean way of doing things, and I mean the little things. The little things. Tex Ags, Billy Lucci and company, I mean, they're the best in the game covering Texas A&M. It's not an on-3 affiliation. We're just giving credit where it's due. When you read the message board over there and you hear the intel, you hear the buzz, notice what players say about the way they do the little things. This is something we heard about in Nebraska last year. The focus on how you go to practice, what you wear to practice, what you wear to workouts, being able to be on time, eating the right things. Just the level of attention to detail is so massive in college football because if you do enough little things right, pretty much every coach across the country says this, they add up to the big things. And that's the thing with Texas A&M. We've never really questioned the engine out there. The portal's done what the portal does, man. It's going to give and it's going to take, and it took a lot from A&M, but still, there's a lot of talent on that roster, more than enough to win with in 2024. And so if Mike Elko and that structure he provides gets the most out of that engine that is that roster at A&M, A&M's going to be a force in the SEC. No ifs, ands, or buts. So those are our big what-ifs for Volume 2 of spring football. Only have so many more of these left. Get at me on socials, okay? JD Piquel, Twitter, Instagram. Let me know what your big what-ifs are for the college football spring season. Because we're junkies. Like Andy Staples says, we're sickos, all right? We're tuned in here in March and talking about college football for an hour. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and at the same time, it is a rather wild thing. That's why we call it junkie season. Now, I want to shift gears here to some news that sort of came out within the last week or so. And Jesse Simonton, again, phenomenal columnist for us here at On3, has a really good article about this already. I was talking before the show to Nick before we got rolling here. Jesse Simonton, a must-follow on Twitter and a must-read on on3.com, just providing heat-seeking missiles every single day, it feels like, with his columns. But he's got an article out there talking about what Steve Spurrier had to say about Florida Gator football and Billy Napier. In the interview, here's a little tidbit here from an interview with the Florida Times-Union. He says, Billy, speaking of Billy Napier, of course, quote, Billy is a good guy who works his tail off. I like Billy, good family man, but we do wish the organization was a little bit more tidy. Now, this is Steve Spurrier, and J.C. Simonton in the article does a great job. He says, in all caps, who still holds a paid ambassador title and office in the swamp. Okay, so the context here matters. The context of where this messaging is coming from, that matters. Like, it's someone who is not just a guy who coached there and played there. We'll talk more about that in a second. Being an alum, I think, does matter when we assess this whole discussion. This is a guy who's still tied to the program. This is a guy who's still in the building to a degree. And he's saying we. He's not saying I feel this way. He's saying we as a whole feel this way. Now, he also says other things talking about the direction of Florida when it comes to their NIL efforts. He loosely refers to Trevor Etienne leaving from Florida to Georgia, and he's like, how could that ever happen? What Florida fan ever thought that they would lose their top running back to Georgia? I think there's more to that than what meets the eye. But the other part of this we have to consider, being an alum, being someone who's from Florida, if you're Steve Spurrier, he has a little bit extra passion baked in there, a little bit of extra pride. And with extra passion, extra pride, it's like, who's the hardest on you probably? Outside of yourself, the people that love you, people that care about you, your parents probably have the most critical opinion of you in some respects because why? They expect more out of you. They expect you to live up to the standard. They expect you to do these great things. And also with Steve Spurrier having been a coach at Florida, you'd have to imagine it's next to impossible to see somebody do the job that you did at a high level and not have a strong opinion on what they're doing, whether it's critical or whether it's positive. So I think that's important to remember as we sort of take inventory of this whole situation and this whole interview from Steve Spurrier. There's one thing, though, that the verbiage was a little bit curious to me as we unpacked what Steve Spurrier had to say. The use of the word tidy. That's what's concerning to me. He didn't say subpar. He didn't say we're off base. He said we wish it was a little bit more tidy. And tidy to me, the first thought I have there is, okay, he's speaking to the details. And so my mind went, okay, well, what has Florida done, at least from an on-the-field perspective, that has maybe left more to be desired from a detail-oriented point of view? Penalties. Now, I think Steve Spurrier is probably speaking a little bit more to the internal operation, but here's the deal. In college football, the internal and the on-the-field product, they kind of go hand in hand. You can't have one out of order and the other look great. So when it comes to the on-the-field part of this whole thing being tidy, Steve Spurrier saying, I wish it was more tidy. I wish they were a little bit more on their P's and Q's when it came to how they operated on the field. They were 118th in the country in terms of penalties a game. in Gainesville last year. Now, if I'm Billy Napier and I'm reading this article and I'm hearing what's being said from Steve Spurrier, I'm like, hey, man, can we keep this in-house? Can we have a conversation? Can you come to my office and talk to me? Can we not go to the Florida Times Union and have this big discussion, have this out in the open? Because what you're doing here, if I'm Billy Napier, I'm talking to Steve Spurrier, you're hamstringing me. You're making my job harder. Because this isn't just some fan on a message board. This isn't just, Stevie Gator 42 saying, I wish this place was more tidy. You have a guy who coached, played, went here, won a Heisman here, has a statue here, very publicly voicing his things he doesn't like about the Florida program. And that makes your job harder as a head coach. Like, people are going to listen to one of the most visible figures voicing his discontentment with Billy Napier's job he's doing internally. So if I'm Billy Napier, I'm like, hey, man, if we want this thing to actually move forward, let's not have this out in the open. Let's not have this narrative run through a newspaper. Let's talk about it. You want something fixed? I respect you. Let's talk about it. Let's get this thing headed the right direction. We want the same thing here, clearly. You want to win. I want to win. You love this place. I love this place. Let's link arms here and work together to get this done. That would be my first thought if I'm Billy Napier. Also, recruits see this. Like, you think a recruit is reading that and saying, yeah, I want to go to Florida? I don't think that's doing too many favors for Billy Napier from Steve Spurrier. So that would be frustrating for me if I'm the head coach at Florida right now. I do think we need to mention this, though. I can't speak to the in-house matters at Florida. Just quite frankly, never been inside the house. I'm not even taking a look through a window at the house. But the thing that's concerning to me here is Steve Spurrier is saying these things publicly. What's being said behind closed doors? What's being said that's not on the record? Because if Steve Spurrier feels strongly enough to say a version of this to a reporter, what's he saying to other powers that be in Gainesville? Heck, what is he saying to Billy Napier? What is he saying to the rest of that staff? And what is so pressing? What does he feel so strongly about that makes him feel like he has to say this to this sort of degree, to this watered-down version out into the public? Because that's my concern. What he's saying probably is watered down. As outspoken as Steve Spurrier is, I don't think you're getting the 100 level of what he is actually feeling and saying to other people off the record. Now, for Billy Napier, I want to make sure we say this again. None of this is fair. And that's not me saying that Billy Napier gets excused from what's happening at Florida. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying not all jobs are created equal, and Billy Napier got the job at Florida because the guy before him wasn't cutting it. Okay, it wasn't like the guy just left a pristine roster and pristine culture for him, like they were losing football games, so Billy Napier came in and got that job. That's a reality. Also, the schedule is absolutely brutal. We've talked about it multiple times on this show. Let's just talk through November here. Georgia and Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. That's ridiculous. Is that fair? No, it's not fair. But again, college football, college football isn't fair. What's happening isn't fair. So I'm not excusing anything for Billy Napier, but I just think it needs to be referenced a little bit here. Like, this isn't just the most even playing field he's stepping on and trying to get Florida to where he expects them to be. It is what it is. Now, I would say this, though. As much as this narrative has persisted and as much noise is going on externally in Gainesville, winning changes everything, all right? Winning changes everything. So if Billy Napier and company, let's say they win 8 games. Their over-under win total, I believe, is 5.5 right now in Vegas. Let's say they win 8 games. Against that narrative, with what they were expected to do, what people are saying about them, how much juice that would pour on the brand that Florida Gator football is, the direction they're heading. We expected this and y'all did this. There's a great book by Ryland Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way, essentially taking things that are negative or perceived obstacles to getting to where you want to go and using them to your advantage. If Billy Napier wins 8 games next year, I think that would be the way, and I think that would juice him up quite a bit for the next season. And again, I think he keeps his job if that's what happens. So I don't love that if I'm Billy Napier from Steve Spurrier saying those things, but I'm curious what went into warranting him feeling like he had to say those things. Wild times. Wild times march in college football. Hey, get in the chat right now. Let us know your take on this whole situation, whether it be the multiverse of Lane Kiffin and Mike Norvell, whether it be what Shane Beamer had to say, whether it be your thoughts and feelings on Steve Spurrier sounding off on the situation at Florida. I want to hear from y'all. Okay, so get in there. Also, like the video while you're at it. We'd appreciate that tremendously. Live chat, like the video, good deal. Got one more segment to get to here, and that is the non-quarterback transfer guys that you need to know about. And I guarantee you already know about some of these cats, but I want us to just sort of get circled up here together and talk about a few more. This is not an all-encompassing list. Might do this more than once depending on how y'all respond to it. But the quarterbacks, they get all the shine when it comes to the transfer portal, right? They're always the big names, and for good reason. You got a quarterback, you got a chance. That changes the outlook of your 2024 season. Just ask Ohio State, ask Miami, how they view their team right now and their roster right now with Cam Ward and Will Howard than they did before. It is what it is. But without further ado, man, let's get right to it. LSU, man, I think they might have gotten the most underrated transfer portal addition in wide receiver C.J. Daniels from Liberty. He is the reason why, if you're an LSU fan, you can still expect your offense to be potent. Now, Garrett Nussmeier, we know this, man. We got a ticket on the Nuss bus. We're going one way. We feel good about him. But Garrett Nussmeier, if you throw the ball 50 yards and there's nobody to catch it, that's a 50-yard incompletion. C.J. Daniels averaged 20 yards of reception last year at Liberty, a 1,000-yard receiver. You lose 2,500 yards in production from Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas gone to the league. I'm not saying C.J. Daniels going for over 2K. I'm not saying that, but I do think you feel a lot better having him on your roster in trying to replace that. Also, Kyron Lacey coming back. That's massive for the folks in Baton Rouge. C.J. Daniels, absolute stud, someone to know this upcoming season. A little bit off the radar last year, being at Liberty. He'll be on the radar this year in the SEC. Let's go to the other side of the ball now. Jabbar Muhammad was locked down at Washington a season ago. Absolutely locked down. Locked down a couple of times now against Oregon, which is his new home. He had 14 pass deflections last season. Getting his hand on the football a whole heck of a lot. He's going to mix it up too. I love the way he plays DB. He's not afraid to get his hands on you. He's not afraid to be physical. He'll play through the whistle. He was a top 15 player in the transfer portal for us here at On 3. For me, for Oregon, this is massive because you got to have a big-time corner, I believe, if you want to win at the highest level. I mean, for Michigan last year, it was Will Johnson. I mean, you had Mike Sanders still as well playing safety. Having elite secondary players is crucial because you're going to have to play potent offenses, especially in the postseason. Now, Oregon, they'll have to play potent offenses during the season as well. They got Ohio State coming to town October 12th. Not a non-conference game. That's going to be an interconference game. So seeing Jabbar Muhammad out there on Emeka Egbuka, Jabbar Muhammad out there on Jeremiah Smith to help sort of minimize the damage there, that's massive. Absolutely massive. One of the top players in the portal, one of the top players, obviously, that's a non-quarterback in the portal that we needed to make sure we were on the same page with there. We talked about LSU a second ago in terms of landing someone through the portal. Let's talk about someone they lost through the portal that's headed to Tennessee, and that is offensive tackle Zalance Hurd. Zalance Hurd, man, 2023 five-star cat. The massive thing to watch with him this spring is getting acclimated to how Tennessee runs their offense, because they ask a lot of that offensive line now. I mean, you go fast running the play every 20 to 30 seconds. They might even go more quickly with these new radio communications in the helmet. With him being on the offensive line and help ensuring what that unit's going to look like, that only raises the excitement for one Nico Iamaleava. There's no way around it. Like, you expect big things from Nico, but you only expect big things from Nico if you're able to protect him. So Lance Hurd adding into that offensive line was huge, absolutely huge for Josh Heupel and company. Five-star guy. They don't grow on trees. We'll say that much. Now, this is someone that you already knew about, but I want to make sure we talk about it anyway, because you can't do a non-quarterback transfer portal segment and not mention the top player in the transfer portal. That was, of course, safety Caleb Downs. Was at Alabama. Nick Saban retires. He says, I came here for the GOAT, so if the GOAT's not here, I'm going to look elsewhere. Thought he was going to Georgia. Everybody thought he was going to Georgia, yours truly included. He of course, was not going to Georgia, ends up at Ohio State. He was the best player in the portal for a reason. He is extremely, extremely versatile. Was not afraid to come up and tackle last year for Alabama, led the team in tackles as a safety, also did a great job in pass coverage. You saw him start in the Rose Bowl with the interception that didn't end up counting, but you saw the ball skills there. The dude can play, also can help you in the punt return side of things. The big thing for me with Caleb Downs, outside of what he brings on the field, which is just straight up special, what he brings to that locker room, I think could end up being the most impactful part of this, because Caleb Downs is a thermostat. There's thermostat guys, there's thermometer guys. Thermometer guys, they sort of adapt to their environment, sort of adapt to the temperature of the room. Hey, if we're going 7 out of 10 on this drill out of an intensity standpoint, I'm going to go 7 out of 10 because everybody else is. Caleb Downs sets the temperature. He is a thermostat. He's going 12 out of 10 every single time on every drill from what I've been able to glean from people talking about him. For a team like Ohio State, who is continuing to push and push and push to try and get over the hump and get back to where they expect to be, winning the Big Ten, winning national titles, they've got a ton of roster talent. But adding a thermostat guy like Caleb Downs in there who's going to help bring that last 5% out of not just himself but his teammates and get them over to that place they want to be competitively, I think that could be the most important part of adding him to that defense, because the defense is going to be solid. Whether they got Caleb Downs or not through the portal, they were going to be a top 10 unit by nature of who they bring back, heck, top 5 unit for some folks in Columbus. But I'm curious to watch how he impacts the overall feel in that room, in that team room for Ohio State. Last guy to get to here, from Texas A&M to Alabama now, LT Overton. This is a dude now who was a 5-star cat in 2022, a 5-star plus individual, mind you, meaning every single service in the country believed he was a 5-star player. That means something. Alabama lost a lot on defense. They bring back like 33% of that production. For Kalen DeBoer to be successful in Tuscaloosa, I think a lot of that will hinge on them upholding the standard defensively there and the talent level there. That's going to be massive because in the SEC, man, like you have to be multiple. Have to be multiple in terms of playing good offensively and good defensively. Playing well offensively and playing well defensively at a high level. That's what they expect, especially in Tuscaloosa, which is, built to win championships at the SEC level and the national level. Having guys like LT Overton, I don't know if that's like the fix right away, but having a big body like him, he's right around, I think he's 6'5", 265 is what he's listed at on A&M's roster. He's a stud. He's a stud, and he's going to be a part of upholding that defensive line tradition they've had over there for the better part of the last 17 years. Hat tip to Nick Saban. So a lot of guys to know. Might be something we keep doing depending on how y'all respond to that. But those are some transfer portal guys that do not play quarterback that will have a massive impact on their title races and the college football playoff this 2024 season. It's a new era of college football where you kind of have to recalibrate. It feels like every single month and figure out, okay, who's where, which coach left a head coaching job at a G5 school to take a position job at a Power 5 school, Power 4 school, whatever you want to call it. Glad to have you all tuned in, man. The best part of this whole show is getting to hear from y'all at the end of this thing. So without further ado, let's bring on that man, Nick Brake. Nick, what's up, baby? How we doing?
Good, man. First question we got coming from The Truth. He says, is it fair or foul to say the Florida Gators lost their fear factor when Urban Meyer walked out of the door?
Lost their fear. I mean, I have a hard time saying they lost their fear factor when Urban Meyer left. Florida has still been very competitive. I mean, they've played for SEC titles. They've been in BCS and New Year's Six caliber bowls. I don't know if they lost their fear factor. I think that they are probably trying to recapture that edge that they've had in Gainesville. I think that's something that's been missing a little bit for them. But who's to say they don't get it back here in the next couple of years? Billy Napier in this year will be very, very telling about the direction. If they have to go somewhere else after the season, if there needs to be massive changes made, whether it's on the staff or whether it's at the top, I don't know. But this will be a very, very telling season. I'm excited to watch how they respond because, again, I think Billy Napier's made of the right stuff. Whether it works at Florida or not, it's not an accident that he got this job. But I'm curious to see how they respond to this very, very loud narrative that's been going on this entirety of this offseason.
Sounds good. King Epic says, out of all the college football playoff games we've had since it started, which game do you think was the best and most entertaining? For me, it was 2017 Oklahoma versus Georgia.
That's a good one. That's a tough one to beat. Oklahoma-Georgia might be that game. Like, that's the one that gets talked about now when you talk about the best playoff, best Rose Bowls probably even, period. Georgia and Oklahoma, that was a fun one. Trying to rack my brain for another one, man. Honestly, Washington, Texas was up there this year. We'll see how it ages. If Washington had won the national title, maybe that ages better. That one came down to the last play. I loved that one. Let's see, what else? That first couple of playoff eras hit different. Like Michigan State and Alabama, that was a fun one. Man, heck, Michigan, Alabama this year, that's also up there. Coming down to the last play in overtime. I'll go ahead and ride that one. I think Michigan, Alabama is probably one of my top ones for our playoff era. I know I'm missing some, so let me know in the chat which ones we're missing. But I'll say Michigan and Alabama, man, coming down to the very last play in overtime.
Sounds good. Braxton All says, I'm here since you guys talked to my head coach. How many games do you see South Carolina winning if everything clicks how it's supposed to?
Tune in July. We'll give you our win-loss via the old TikTok and Instagram socials. Not a fan of doing that exercise, Nick, but I think it does have it does force us to definitively say they're winning this many games, which we'll do. Don't look at it twisted. We'll do that, but come back in July and we'll give a more concrete answer there.
Fair enough. We got another one from The Truth. Says 2 dark horse coaches that could win Coach of the Year candidates. Let's just assume things.
That's fun to. It's that time of year. Let's assume some things. Coach of the Year candidates. I think Brian Kelly's got to be up there with LSU. I think Dan Lanning with Oregon, they've got to be there. I'd love if Ryan Day were to get it done. Like, for all the things that have been said about Ohio State and their not accomplishing, what they're capable of and losing to Michigan, if he were to come right back and win National Coach of the Year, I would love that. I don't know if he's a dark horse for that, but I do love that. I got Braxton All, not a fan that we didn't give him a solid win-loss. Braxton, I think bowl game is reasonable. I think it's very reasonable to root for that and hope for that. I also see someone in the chat, Derek Williams, saying Bama blew out Michigan State. I understand that, but the feel around it to me, the fact that was like, I think that might have been the first playoff, I think. No, it wasn't the first playoff. Might have been the second. It was one of the earlier playoffs, but regardless, just having the playoff was kind of a nostalgic thing in some ways now looking back. But yeah, I'd love to see Ryan Day as a dark horse Coach of the Year.
Yeah, shout out Sammy also asked that question. So
good stuff.
Sandman, who is always in the chat causing some warfare, asked a good question. I gotta find it.
I see him saying Texas Washington wasn't very great. I do see the Texas icon for the live chat, so we appreciate that.
I wonder why
to war for
Sandman
your team,
thinks
man.
that. Sandman did say, "What if Lincoln Riley only wins 8 games or less at USC this year?"
If that happens, I don't think that would be that wild. I think it would make a lot of people upset, but I think we also have to factor in, like, they won 7 games in the Pac-12 with Caleb Williams playing quarterback, arguably one of the best college football players of this generation. So I don't think them winning less than 8 games in a more difficult conference would be a massive surprise. I think if we see that the year after, we start to see a trend of, like, hey, USC and Lincoln Riley, they're not really working out how we thought it would. I'm not saying there's changes. I'm just saying that would be the concerning thing for me. What do you say, Nick? One more?
One more. This one I'm looking for didn't have Ask JD on it, so it's a little hard to find, but it was a good question. So in the meantime, JD, I would say everyone needs to like the video, right?
Yeah, hey, everyone like the video. Let's subscribe. We're back same time tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern. Got another head coach for you. I think the good folks that tune into this channel, we get to see sort of a demographic, if you will, where they're watching from and what videos they like. Tomorrow is going to be one they want to tune into. So follow me on the socials to find out who that's going to be. But 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Dial in, another head coaching interview for you.
So Willie T's kind of taking a shot at Florida State fans, saying, if you're a Florida State fan, how good do you feel knowing that just 2 years ago you were calling for Norvell to be fired?
I think that's something I forgot to mention talking about Florida. 2 deals with Florida and Florida State. Florida State, they were ready as a fan base, I believe, to pass on Mike Norvell after the 5-7 season. It came down to an onside kick. They didn't beat Florida, missed a bowl game, all that. Then they pop and win 10 games. Like, it can change quickly now. It can change quickly. I think Florida fans need to recognize that. And also talking about Billy Napier, this was a team that I thought was competitive in the majority of their games last year. Now, you get zero credit for being competitive, but I think that needs to at least be assessed when you talk about, should we move off Billy Napier? Like, okay, the Kentucky game, that was a game where that team just didn't show up. Let's be clear about that. Second part of this, the Georgia game, that was a game that was less competitive, I believe, but Georgia's, I think, the best team in the country last year from a roster point of view. So I don't know that I would sell all the stock in Billy Napier just yet, man. I mean, I'm always the last one to get off the branch when it comes to, should we fire this coach or not? I'm always the last guy on that ship going down with it. But I really believe that it is still too early to have a definitive take on Billy Napier as a Florida Gators head coach right now in March. We'll see in fall. We'll have a better gauge when it comes to September, October, but I think it's too early right now.
JD, really quick, who challenges Georgia outside of Texas? Is from Derek Williams.
Hey, Bama's still going to be tough. Bama, they got Georgia in the regular season. LSU, we're high on LSU this year, man. Year 3 in Brian Kelly usually is a big jump. Or not a big jump, but it's always a good year. He said it himself. Those got to be the ones you got to look at. Ole Miss, dude, Ole Miss is going to be stocked. Ole Miss is going to be nasty next year. I'm very, very high on Ole Miss for 2024.
Sounds good. Okay, JD, I'll see you, man.
Love it, man. Good deal. Nick Brake holding it down, punching the show, keeping the chat, making this whole thing happen, man. Hey, we appreciate y'all making it happen. Tune in tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. I'll give you a little hint here. SEC head coach again. So make sure you're following me on Instagram and on Twitter at JD Pickell. Those will be the first places we announce it. Probably Instagram if I had to guess. Make sure you're dialed in. We love y'all. We do not take for granted the fact that y'all tune in and spend some time with us here every single day, talking about the greatest sport in the world. Live Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're back on the air tomorrow. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all.